Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dirrick Butler here, stuck in the house. I hope you guys are doing well. I first just want to thank you guys so much for tuning in to this live broadcast of a conversation that I'm going to have with one of my good friends, Dr. Chezare Warren. I am kind of, disappointed that we weren't able to have this event in person. But I am super excited and proud of the fact that we have some amazing technology that will allow for both me and Cesare to have this amazing conversation about his book, Urban Preparation. I've been reading this book for a few months now. And one of my coworkers, one of my good friends, Tyler, will tell you that literally every chapter I read, I'm running out to her like, Tyler, like, look at this. Like, can you believe this part? Or why are we doing this in our school? So it's like really exciting that I'm able to sit down and talk with him about his amazing book. And some of his other thoughts around some work via schools post COVID-19. I want to quickly, for those who aren't too familiar with Project OneTen, of course, share with you a little bit about the work that we do. So I'm the founder and program director, if you will, of Project OneTen. We work every day to support young men of color successfully transition from 8th grade to high school. And we do this in various ways. Each student receives a mentor that works with them one-on-one throughout the process of transitioning, but also throughout their freshman year. And then we also partner every young man with an academic coach, someone who's able to sit down with them and go over homework, talk with them about test prep. A lot of our students are getting ready for SAT skills, and these academic coaches really work with them on the more tangible things that will lead to them being successful academically at school. While our mentors support more with the soft skills, acclimating to a new environment, how to stay organized. So this is the work of Project OneTen, and we've been doing this work for over a year now. And I'm just so excited and thankful for the team of people that we've been able to pull together to support this work. I'm thankful for you all, the supporters of this work, whether you volunteered, you've shared posts on Facebook, you've donated. It all has helped to make this work truly happen and to really make an impact in the lives of Black and brown boys on the south and west sides of our city. So thank you for what you've done to keep our work going, and thank you for joining us today. I know that this is an added thing to your calendar. You guys have been in video calls all day long, I'm sure. But I want you all to grab a glass of wine, get comfortable, and we're going to have an amazing conversation with Dr. Warren. I have my wine here, so feel free. So we're going to spend some time talking with Dr. Warren about his book, and then, of course, we will have an opportunity for questions. If you guys would, you can type your questions in the comment section. Our amazing intern, Andrew, is going to take all of your questions and place them in our Google Doc that we're going to be looking at. And that's how we'll be asking the questions. So make sure that you post your questions. Don't hesitate to wait to the end to post them. Feel free to post them throughout the conversation. And we will be out of here by 6:30. Y'all, it is hot outside, and therefore it's hot in my apartment, and my glasses are sliding off right now. I'm thankful that the weather is really warm, but I'm hopeful that you guys are inside, safe, and saving lives, as Mayor Lightfoot would say. So we are going to go ahead and bring in Dr. Warren. But before we get started, I want to bring attention to two amazing opportunities for folks on the live to contribute to some amazing organizations that are doing work here in the city of Chicago. So, two organizations that I would like for you guys to support through making small or large contributions is the Surge Relief Fund. This past year, I was a part of the Surge Fellowship Program, and it is an amazing organization that is working to give leaders of color the tools, access, and support that they need to do the work of centering equity in their schools, in whatever type of work that they do specific to students and education. So I would love for you guys to check out project110.org/COVID-19 support, and you can contribute directly to the Surge Relief Fund. And as it says here, all funds raised will support Surge alumni and current fellows who are directly serving people in need all over the United States who have been impacted by COVID-19. I'm a part of a group of 100 plus people across the country who have been a part of the Surge Fellowship, and we are all doing some amazing things. And this fund will assist us in continuing to do that work specifically during this time. And then the second fund that I want to bring to your attention is the Chicago Scholars Response Fund. And the Chicago Scholars Response Fund is raising funds for first-generation college students who are attending colleges and universities across the country. And this fund will assist them in whatever ways that they need. A lot of these students had to uproot, move back home, figure out where they're going to be living, and just need overall support during this transition time. And Chicago Scholars is doing that amazing work in supporting our college students, first generation students at that. So I am super excited to support these two organizations, and I hope that you all will support this work as well. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring on Dr. Warren. Chezare, how are you doing? Yeah, unmute yourself. Can you hear me?
I need to unmute myself.
There we go. There we go. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am, I'm yet holding on.
I'm telling people that I'm taking each day as it comes and tackling it. So.
Yes. I love what you're sharing on social media every day, finding joy or something that is uplifting to your spirit each day. Because I think, we can go through this time complaining in the house, but when we get out there, we're taking our walks, finding things that bring us joy, whether that's reading, writing, talking with friends on Facebook, taking a walk. So share with us some of the things that you've been doing to stay sane and to find joy in this time.
Every Sunday I sit down with my calendar and I write into my calendar when I'm going to exercise, when I'm going to read. I answer email once a day generally. And I really structure my day. I want to get a handle of my day so that my day doesn't handle me. And that's been really important to my mental well-being, mental health. I also take walks and get outside daily, even if it's just opening a window or opening the patio door and stepping out on the patio. And I talk to people. I spend time being honest with how I'm feeling with people. And I have phone calls and video virtual happy hours and virtual birthday parties and virtual anything else. We can do it online. So yeah, that's good. That's really been helping. And reading and watching good TV.
That's what's up. Yeah, I the other day had attended a surprise virtual birthday party. It was very interesting, but it turned out really cool. My friend was really surprised. But of course you're on this Zoom call with 50 people, and it's okay, let's do something here. But it turned out really, really cool. So I love just the creativity that people are having during this time.
Certainly.
Yep. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in. The reason that we are here Once again,
Yes.
thank you so much. But for those who aren't familiar with you, like let's just do kind of like a brief biography. Like, who are you? What do you do? And why are you connected to the work of supporting Black boys specifically in your day to day work?
Thank you for that. So I am from Chicago. I actually was born in Rogers Park, but I say I'm from the South Side. I'm sort of split between the North Side and the South Side. And I was a middle school and high school math teacher. I'm a graduate of Bogan High School, went through Chicago Public Schools, went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, ILL, studied elementary education, got a minor in math, and I became a middle school and high school math teacher. And then towards the end of my K-12 professional career, I became an instructional leader at 2 turnaround elementary schools in Chicago, on the South Side and on the near West Side. So I've been in education about 15 years, and there came a point as a teacher where I started to ask questions about my success and efficacy as a Black man teacher. I started my career teaching on the West Side in Austin and North Lawndale, communities of Chicago. And what I learned as an undergraduate didn't take me very far when it came to building substantive, authentic relationships with the young people that I was serving, and in particular, the Black boys. And I think that there was an expectation that as a Black man teacher that I automatically had some sort of intuition about serving Black kids that eluded my white female colleagues, many of whom I identify to be well-intentioned and hardworking individuals, but who really did struggle building relationships. And I turned my attention towards really learning what it meant to humanize my interactions with Black kids, particularly groups of students who I knew were being read in larger society as deviant and criminal, and young people who could care less about school and could care less about authority. But that also wasn't the experience that I was having. I had my difficulties and my conflicts, but part of what I was able to do pretty early on was start to develop these relationships with young people that really gave me another view and another understanding of their lived reality. And eventually stumbled into graduate school. I have a master's in school leadership. I thought I wanted to be a principal. And then I did my principal internships, and I realized I don't really want to be a principal. It's not the type of hard work I really want to be engaged in. But what that experience did do, I had an instructor in my first master's course, and at the time I was I was early in my teaching career, and I said, I'm going to quit. And he said, Chezare, I think you're an intelligent, a really amazing thinker and writer. You could earn a PhD. And that was the seed that was planted that eventually led me to apply to a PhD program, matriculate through, and finish. And I say to folks don't generally believe me when I say this, I never actually expected to finish graduate school. I started because it was sort of something to do. I could keep my loans in forbearance, and I could tell my grandmother, right, I'm applying to PhD programs. At the time, I really wanted to move out of Chicago. So teaching in another place was not a good reason to leave Chicago. I needed to give my family a real reason. Like, I'm going to go and be a doctor. And that's a reason for me to leave. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out that way. I ended up going to UIC, which turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, which sort of brings me to my research career in academia and what I'm studying now. So I was a full-time working person as a PhD student. I went to class at night and I worked all day. What that did for me, it allowed me to start to take what I was learning as a doctoral student and immediately apply it to my practice as a middle school 8th grade math teacher on the South Side. Yeah. And I began to ask real questions of myself in terms of how did I come to know myself the ways that I know myself in the classroom? What's led me to take particular approaches or strategies to the work that I was doing with young people every day? And some work caught my eye in critical race theory around this concept of false empathy. So to make a long story short, I immediately started studying empathy as the area where I wanted to invest myself in terms of a dissertation But always central to that work and my interest in improving outcomes for Black boys in particular was really trying to understand race and how interpersonal interaction could really shape the trajectory of a young person's life. And sort of getting us to this book, I ended up working at Urban Prep. And many of the same issues that I struggle with working alongside many white women teachers, I found we had those same issues when it was a predominantly Black male teaching faculty working with Black boys. So my work is ultimately interested in understanding the conditions that facilitate high academic outcomes for Black boys and by extension Black youth. And that work has taken lots of different forms from when I started to now, which is sort of 10 years later.
Yeah. That's what's up. Yeah, I think so granted, I don't have a PhD, but I was in grad school getting my master's in ed policy while teaching. And I think it is a really cool opportunity to be in school and learning about schools and education while you're actually doing that work. Because I just would sit in meetings and I would be seeing things and hearing things that other people wouldn't necessarily be seeing or hearing. And I was like, yo, let's really think about this. Let's pull this out, bringing in different theories and ideas. It was a really cool opportunity. So yeah, I can definitely see how that really lended to your work. And then specifically in writing this book, Urban Preparation. So kind of transitioning to the book. I mean, you talk about a lot of things. Yes, I see the nice poster in the back. I mean, you talk about a lot of stuff that isn't unique to Urban Prep. It's the context in which you write, but it covers a lot of different things. There's one portion of the book towards the end. The person that wrote your afterword in the book talks about, to be clear, this is not a book about Urban Prep or schools like it, but rather in cultivating urban preparation at the scholarly intersections of race, class, and gender. Warren intends to reveal the schisms that research on urban schooling has for too long tried to under-theorize or simply ignore. So I love the fact that, yes, that's the context in which you write, and some could see that as, attacking or, whatever. But this book can be put up against any school. At the school that I work at, I read this book, and I'm like, this is so true. So I want to kind of jump into a little bit about some of the things that you talked about in this book. And if you could kind of give us, for those who haven't read or who have read, I was immediately drawn to chapter 3. Chapter 3, I think, is most of my highlights, sticky notes in the margins. So set up for us chapter 3 and what that chapter lends to, and then I'll kind of jump into some of the points that resonated with me.
Sure. So urban preparation, as and the person who wrote the afterword is Dr. James Earl Davis, professor at Temple University, who is an amazing mentor and colleague. This book is not about that school. It's not about urban prep. The book plays on the language of urban preparation to talk about the ecology of moments, people, incidences inside and outside of school that shape the education trajectories of young Black men from Chicago's South Side to and through college.
Yeah.
We can't tell a story of a young person's trajectory to and through college when we know that the journey to college starts somewhere in middle school without naming the significance of their secondary institution or the high school in that journey.
Yeah.
So urban prep stands out as very prominent in this storyline because of the significant impact that it did have on these young people's trajectories. I think what comes out in the book pretty clearly is that for a lot of the young men whose voices are very prominently featured in this book, we notice that urban prep, without them having gone to urban prep, their trajectories could look very different. So what this book attempts to do, as different from a lot of books in the marketplace, is to really chronicle this journey as they move from middle school into the first couple years of high school, into the last couple years of high school, into and through college. And so the book is a pipeline text.
Yeah.
And so chapter 3 is a spot in the pipeline. When we talk about the K-12 education pipeline or the P20 education pipeline, we're talking about the range of schooling experiences that young people will engage with or encounter as they move from grade to grade and get promoted, right? So chapter 3 is where we enter a discussion of the young man's first 2 years of high school. I think it is also worth saying 2 things here. One, it was really important to me, and the way that I wrote this book is very different from most other academic books. I tried to make it very accessible in terms of its language and organization, but it was really important to me to center student voice and to make sure that those voices were loud and clear. Because even if you want to argue with my interpretation, you can't argue with what they actually said. So if you have another way of interpreting it, it's fine. But you have my interpretation juxtaposed against what they actually said. So the book is really centered on student voice. The other thing is, I want to shout out also my colleague, Dirrick Brooms, who was a founding math teacher. I'm sorry, I was a founding math teacher at Urban Prep. I don't think I mentioned that. But he was a founding teacher as well, an administrator, and he was there for 4 years. So we did this project together and then had an arrangement where I ended up writing the book, most of the book. He made some contributions. But it was important to us, what I wanted to do in this book and in the study that the book is derived from, is that we've had a lot of information about urban prep as changing the narrative, right? And that's really important because what it acknowledges is that Black boys and Black bodies have been largely caricatured as thugs, as deviant, as hypersexuals, anti-intellectual. So we want images that help to counter and offer counter stories to these sort of dominant perspectives of Black boys. At the same time, we don't know very much in the public what factors definitively really help to shape the success of that school and the efficacy of its educational programs to really set these boys on a journey to and through college. Because it's one thing to be admitted. What they celebrate every year is 100% acceptance, which is laudable, right? We don't want to take anything away from that. What we also want to understand, though, is are they completing? Are they persisting? Are they even going, right? Do they graduate and actually go? Being accepted is one metric of school success, but there are many others that are important. And what we didn't have prior to this book is a way of thinking about all of the different contexts that shape these boys' school success or the lack thereof, right? Okay. So to get to what you asked me about, chapter 3. Chapter 3 focuses on their first 2 years transitioning into high school. Chapter 2 is about life on the south side of Chicago as they understand it through their eyes. And then chapter 3 is the first couple years of their high school experience. What drew them to the high school? What sort of messages of manhood and masculinity sort of get transmitted to them? And how do we know? And I try to go deep in making sense of what it means to be a charter high school on the south side of Chicago in an urban education landscape that is changing as we think about gentrification, municipal disinvestment, all of the ways that our city has failed to care for vulnerable populations. In this context, what does it mean for this high school to exist? Yeah. And what does it mean for how these boys then at the same time are developing a racial and gender identity? And what messages are they getting about race and gender that they will internalize and take with them as they move into their last couple years of high school and eventually out into and through college?
Sir, I mean, drop mic. That was amazing. So I think you really touched on contextually, right? Like what urban prep was created to do, and how it sits within the context of the landscape that it lives in, right? One of the things that really stuck out to me in what you wrote about was in changing that narrative. Like, how are you actually, I'm using that phrase because we're talking about urban prep, but globally, when we talk about schools, how are we positioning the young black boys and brown boys that go to school to live and enter into this successful life, accessing college, accessing resources, mentors, and even kind of the broader sense of what it means to be a part of the broader Chicago. One of the things that you talked a lot about was this notion of respectability, right? And I think this was one of the things that, as I think about my journey growing up, and even, thinking about the common notion of how boys should act in order to be seen as opposite of what you talked about earlier. It's all about dress, how they speak, how you present yourself, how do you interact with others, but nothing truly about internal things, right? It's all about like the external. And one of the quotes that like really stuck out to me that I love is it says, justice involves being intentional about allowing young black men and boys to conceive of a future for which they can be proud, instead of simply preparing them to talk, dress, and behave in ways that society, that allows them to enter into society, right? When society doesn't necessarily even see them as fully human. And I think as we think about schools in general, this is a lot of what goes on in schools. What are you wearing? Wearing uniforms. Like, your shirt needs to be tucked in. This is how we talk in professional settings. Like, you are, all of these things without necessarily really tapping into what these young men even aspire or want to do or engage in life. So what are your, thoughts around like this respectability notion in schools?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I remember trying to make sense of my data and trying to wrap my mind around what sort of trends or phenomena I saw emerging from the data. And respectability politics came to me, but I didn't know enough about it. And I went to political science and sociology and history to try to understand something about respectability. Part of what I learned is that respectability is a class politic. And it's a politic that middle to upper class black folks used as a way to contribute to and build up the race. Yeah. Which I find to be really interesting. So in many ways it's well intentioned, right? Because we understand that we're in a white supremacist, anti-black society, and if I don't see where and how, I can't fully imagine how it is that I can overthrow the society and make it something altogether different. Part of what I only see for myself is how it is that I can learn to fit in. And then my responsibility for young people coming behind me is to create a space and an opportunity to help them to fit into this society as it is. Part of the rub with that is that society just continues to recreate the same oppressions. Yep. And then those oppressions become perpetrated by black folks who are very well intentioned in trying to subvert the very oppressions that they are actually reproducing and supporting. Yep. This is not new. Carter G. Woodson talked about this in Miseducation of the Negro, and I remember reading that book as a doctoral student, now having been in the classroom 4 or 5 years, and having this moment of shame, because he makes the argument that if you are educated in the oppressor schools, you will reproduce the oppressor's logics. Yep. And in reproducing the oppressor's logics, we think we're helping folks along, but we are sustaining and maintaining the system of oppression that continues to sort of mire us in this contradiction of progress, right? That Carol Anderson talks about. Yeah, we can get a black president, but you better believe we're still in a white supremacist nation, and the folks who have always had power are not going to take it lightly that they see their power slipping away, i.e. we got who we got in the White House right now. So the concept of respectability politics is I was starting to make sense of how they recruited young people to the school. The images that we see from urban prep, again, it's a tension because you want to see images of black bodies that are not caricatured as animals or thuggish or, sexual deviants. At the same time, and there's nothing wrong with wearing a suit and shirt and tie and having a fade. At the same time, we want to continue to problematize such images for the ways that other groups of black folks, because we're not all the same, continue to be oppressed when that is the image that says this is success, this is good, right? And in some ways, as I was thinking about this data, one of the messages that a school like Urban Prep gives off when they advertise black boys in shirts and ties is that if you send your child to Urban Prep or a school like Urban Prep, because the boys do talk about in chapter 3 about how their parents, but their counselors in elementary school would say, go to Urban Prep, don't go to the neighborhood high school because those kids don't care about an education. And the ways that Urban Prep was marketing itself was to say, if you come here and you bring your sons to this school, we will make them the successful black man that will contribute to society. And if you can imagine, you perpetuate a particular image. It also says the implicit message that this is a public health, public safety contribution that the school is making. There are going to be less black men to be afraid of when you have more black boys who are respectable, who look and perform their gender and sexuality in ways that really more align with what we more dominantly think of when we see success or think success.
Yeah.
Part of what the school did, I sort of say this parenthetically, part of what the school did and was intentional about was, you think about the founder, Tim King, is a Harry Potter fan. And the boys' jackets and their uniform, it makes them look like we're at a prep school, Urban Prep. But in some ways, we position prep schools as like really elite, really like those are the spaces that will, guarantee a future for any person who goes. I think about the Prep for Prep program that gets black kids from urban society and puts them in these elite prep schools and what that means for the promise of their success in the future. I think Urban Prep sort of plays into that. And the last thing I'll say is I talk about a paper in the book by Frank Rudy Cooper, and I found this to be really interesting, where he talks about the bipolarity of black manhood and masculinity, where on the one end, you have images of black men as dangerous, as hyper-deviant. And then on the other end, you have images of black men who are aspiring to whiteness. And sort of respectability is sort of mired in that contradiction as those of us who have been educated try to work towards, not perpetuating stereotypes, but at the same time not having to disassociate ourselves with everything that made us who we are, i.e. our families, our communities, black cultural expression, black art, to become worthy and valuable in a society that has been established in many ways by exploiting black bodies.
Man, yeah, no, all of that. And I think the other piece that kind of directly correlates with that in the same chapter, you talk about this notion of the difference between assimilation versus acculturation, right? And it's interesting that is, how do you what, first of all, what is the difference between the two? If you had to explain the differences between assimilating versus acculturation, what would you say in a sentence or two?
That's a hard question.
Well, maybe not a sentence or two, but yeah.
Well, I think of assimilation as more superficial.
Okay.
Where I am making cosmetic adjustments to quickly fit into a space, where I see acculturation as far more entrenched, as really having to do with changing mindsets. It's a more deeply embedded process where you're getting someone to buy into a particular belief system and ideology, right? So I see them as separate in those ways. One is much more superficial, and one is much more entrenched and embedded in terms of my personhood.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So, I mean, I think even when we think about, the notion of hair, right? I think when I was teaching at Urban Prep, I taught at Urban Prep as well. I was almost very conscious of the fact about how the young men were like policed as to like how they should look, how their hair should look, like all these things, right? But I think it was important for me to showcase, one, I was very young, so I was very close to their age, and I think because of that, a lot of the young men like gravitated towards me. So, I did like some cool stuff with my hair. Like I think one like semester I like colored my hair, which was like totally against the like urban prep thing, right? And I think even now in making the conscious decision to grow my hair back out and to be locked, it's to show that like you can remain and be all the things that you naturally are, be yourself. And there is a line between that assimilation. Yes, like I can go to a meeting, talk to folks, do whatever needs to be done. But I'm going to bring my full self with me, nor do I feel the pressure that I need to change or wear a suit or a tie or talk in any type of like fancy way. And I think that young people need to be exposed to that because oftentimes, as you said, when they see these images, it disconnects them from, as you said, those very people, the culture, the like church environment, all those things people come from, right? And it creates more of this like internal conflict in realizing and seeing like who I really am. And I think the more students are able to interact with folks who embrace all of those things, the better. And I think you talk a lot about that as well.
It's a matter of our humanity.
Yeah.
Right. The more I've been in this profession and the more I think about these issues today in 2020, I can't think about how we understand the challenges facing Black America in any shape, form, or fashion without understanding the significant cost of slavery, in particular for the ways that it has constructed in the public imagination the sort of disposability of the Black body, and how the Black body does not have value and worth aside from its labor, aside from its cultural production. It's really important to note something like hair or speech or style of dress or other forms of cultural expression are ways that our humanity gets sort of pronounced and made. And we then sort of connect that to issues of desire and longing, our interests, the things that we aspire towards and dream. When we walk into a school environment and those things never come up as part and parcel of what the school is doing with relationship to Black kids, it is hearkening to the ways that slavery positioned us as three-fifths human, as objects to be manipulated to the benefit of white landowners to produce wealth that this country now has become the economic superpower that it is, although after COVID-19, we might have to have some other conversations about this. We have to understand that schools are founded in that context, and that those logics are reproduced. So when we talk about respectability and we talk about issues of hairstyle, we have to be cognizant of the ways that such moves and practice and policy is a project in dehumanization. Yeah. And if we're serious about educating Black kids, we have to be serious about finding ways to rehumanize education spaces. I know we're going to get to that more a little later, but that's part of sort of a precursor or way of thinking about sort of this trajectory.
Cool. Yeah, I want to touch on one more thing in Chapter 3 that I think is really important is intersectionality in schools, right? So when we think about Black spaces, oftentimes bringing race, gender, sexuality into the picture. One of the quotes that I really enjoyed is a lack of intention about emphasizing, honoring, and explicitly naming the diversity within Black manhood along the contours of gender and sexual identity too easily confounds efforts to render all young Black men visible in the school community, right? Another thing you talked about was brotherhood means very little if you feel excluded for not adhering to the brother code, even if you never even outwardly express those feelings, right? So when I think about, race, gender, sexuality, these terms and things that are done even like unknowingly, like we don't even know some of the times things that we're saying or how we are othering certain groups of people or even
Absolutely.
honoring one example, right? And not necessarily honoring all others. And I think about,
right.
The sexuality piece, because most of the time that is not something that you oftentimes see or are experiencing right on. It's something that you have to know from like having conversations with people or someone talking to you about it. And I find that very, very important, especially working in a school where we have individuals who are transgender, individuals who who are gender non-conforming, even individuals who are going through procedures to transition, right? Like we as educators have to ensure that we are creating inclusive spaces and not upholding this one notion of Black manhood. Manhood looks, feels, sounds, and is experienced in many different ways. So how did this show up for you and how you, in the young men that you spoke with in writing this book, and how do we kind of uplift this in schools?
Great question. So one thing that, as a qualitative researcher, right, people tell you things in an interview, and part of our job is to search the silence. What aren't they saying, right? One thing that came up so often in the data was reference to the successful Black man. I talk about this in the book as really being code for heterosexual, cisgender, married, college-educated, God-fearing men. If we think about white supremacy and hierarchies of oppression, you think about gender, you think about sexuality, you think about Christianity, you are really talking about the founders of this country, wealthy, Christian, English-speaking, able-bodied men, right? And so when we think about assimilation or acculturation, we do have to question in the education of Black kids, are we inviting them into a space to creatively express all of the ways that they're showing up in their full humanity? And or are we preparing them to sort of occupy spaces in a hierarchy of oppression? One thing that became really clear to me as I was writing this book is the ways that Black men can be both oppressed and oppressor at the same time. The ways that we can reproduce hegemonic notions of manhood and masculinity, that we can lift up aggression and toughness as hallmarks and providing for our families. Patricia Hill Collins talks about the way that the heterosexual family becomes a model of patriarchy. We think about all of the ways that I think about James Earl Davis's work and his colleagues, and the ways that Black men sort of associate their manhood with their ability to provide, so that there's always a class component. So when we think about race and gender and class and sexuality, we're not developing in each of those buckets separately. Those things are playing and informing one another, and how we perform those identities shows up in really interesting ways over time. Yeah. And so when I think about this book and that time period in their lives, part of what human development scholars and developmental psychologists teach us is that race and gender are incredibly salient during those first few years of high school, right? Into middle school, into those first few years of high school. And so Ani Rogers' work, for example, she's at Northwestern. She talks a lot about, in a similar schooling environment, how gender actually became much more salient to the ways that the boys were making sense of navigating the cultural space of their single-sex high school than race, which is really interesting because much of our work I like to call it Black male studies in education, much of our work in the field really centers race. Mm-hmm. As a field, we don't do enough work to understand how race is interacting with gender and sexuality. And part of that is because in my own training, I was trained as a race scholar. I was not trained really very deeply in gender and sexuality. We like to leave that work to women, and that's deeply problematic. Black feminists will talk about their work as not just being about Black women's well-being and freedom, but gender parity writ large, right? We care about all, Black folks understanding, and we regret the fact that language you want to use to reproduce sort of white male patriarchy or patriarchy largely. And that's, as I was even thinking and writing about this, I got to acknowledge the ways that I contribute to patriarchy.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, in the book, I really wanted to bring out how it is that there are scores of young people who likely went to urban prep, who never saw themselves and whose experience in the school just was muted. I sort of tell this story. When I went around and started talking about this book when it came out, I would sometimes encounter former employees, students, and other folks who worked at urban prep. And this is the first text that I think offers a really critical view of urban prep. There are things that I talk about in the book in terms of what the school did well. But I'm also very critical of what actions were taken as the students described them and the ways that those actions reflect larger white supremacist anti-Black logics. Mm-hmm. But there was a colleague who came to me and he said, Dr. Warren, there was a young man who would come and sit in my office every day for 2 weeks. And let's just call this young man Ronald, or Mr. Ronald, because at urban prep, everybody uses their surname, yep. Right? Again, we're socializing them, right, to gender and sexuality. Because if you don't want to be known as a Mr., this is already a violation. But let's call him Mr. Ronald. He sat in the office every day for 2 weeks. And this colleague said, after 2 weeks, he would just talk to the young man and just say, like, why are you sitting in my office every day? And the young man admitted to him, he said, let's call him Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, you're the only adult or person in this school who sees me. Mm. You're the only person who talks to me every day. And he said, that can't be true. You see 8 different teachers, all your classmates. So he decided he was going to shadow Mr. Ronald around the school, right? These names are pseudonyms. I'm going to shadow him as he moves around the school. He says, sure enough, nobody talked to him all day. Mm-hmm. This young man moved through the school invisibly, right? And this young man, as you might guess, identifies as queer. And he was more feminine or softer. You reference this concept of brotherhood, and the young people in the book, they talked a lot about urban prep being a brotherhood and really the significance of a social network that included adult Black men and their peers as they moved across the education pipeline. Part of what other folks have talked about in the field, Tony Lang and T. Elon Dancy in particular, talk about brotherhood as presenting a set of codes around manhood and masculinity that become dominant in a particular socio-cultural space that then become internalized and reproduced by the young people inhabiting that space. Yeah. So on the one hand, we find affinity, care, concern, covering within the codes of brotherhood. And on the other hand, we are policing our classmates who don't fit within that code and inadvertently marginalizing them because of it. Right? So then brotherhood becomes a double-edged sword. So this is what I tried to bring out in the book, that there are some common sense notions around single-sex schools are educating Black boys that too often doesn't include what my colleagues Deron Wallace or Joseph Nelson or Lance McCready might reference as not just a crisis Black boys' education, but crises in Black boys' education. As we think about the ways that they're marginalized along the contours of race, gender, and sexuality in particular. Yeah.
No, I mean that's it's interesting because I can think of a similar student when I was teaching at Urban Prep, and because he walked around the school invisibly, naturally he wanted to be seen, he wanted to be heard, he wanted his presence to be known. So instead of he began to act out, right, and do things that brought, I would say, not positive attention. And I found it my duty to pull him aside and have conversations with him. And I think it takes teachers, as a teacher, I won't say it's difficult because it's not, right? As a teacher, your job, right, is to make sure that students are seen, heard, are loved, and are educated. You may not necessarily agree, whatever. But at the end of the day, like, your responsibility is to make sure that you are seeing students. And that means that you have to be educated on how students want to be addressed, addressed on new terms, terminology, and to take it upon yourself as if this child or this student is your own, right? And I think that that's like incumbent upon every educator. And you don't have to agree with it at all, but you need to make sure that that student feels seen and loved, and is walking through that school holding, their head up, feeling confident and loved. We talk a little bit about that, I think, in the paper we're going to talk about in a minute. But we spent a little bit more time than expected on this, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But I want to shift quickly to one last point.
Let me say,
go ahead.
To your last point on that. It has always been the work of Black educators to attend to and be cognizant of the whole child. So I want to say, I think that educators at Urban Prep and folks who entered the lives of the participants in the study that this book is derived from, that they were indeed thinking about and invested in the overall holistic well-being of every child. Part of the issue, though, is awareness.
Yeah.
Understanding the ways that we are positioned when we're in positions of authority, how we come to believe what we believe about race, about gender, about class, about a success, about achievement, any of the ideologies that sort of swirl around and guide how we do our work, have to be read through and understood through their origins or relationships to oppressive ideologies and those that are the product of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, right? I talk about white supremacy as helping us to understand structurally how systems and institutions create and sustain advantage and disadvantage. But I also think about anti-Blackness as being much more specific in naming the precarity of Black bodies within these spaces. And it helps to sustain white dominance within these spaces and broader in society. And so I think we're caught in a bit of a conundrum in the time that we're in, where folks are really well-intentioned around their work with Black kids, right? So I don't want to demonize teachers and other folks who are doing this work.
Right.
But part of what this book is supposed to do is to raise awareness.
Exactly.
It is supposed to help us to understand the not so common sense of our work, and to notice that's the role of research and researchers, is to bring to light and give language to the spaces that we don't have a way of thinking about in our everyday work.
I'm sorry, I had to laugh when you said research. I love, you PhD folks, y'all love to say research. According to the research, like. Love it. No, thanks so much for bringing that up. Last thing I want to touch on before we move to the final portion of the interview on the paper that you recently wrote. Oftentimes when we think about like being culturally responsive in schools, it's often like race, right? White teachers teaching Black students, like, y'all need to incorporate Black History Month or like Black people in your work, right? But one of the things that I began to like realize is that it's not necessarily race. I mean, it's all things, right? Like what we just talked about: race, gender, sexuality, the community that our students come from, language, lingo, like things that they do, not in a appropriated way, but like in a way that affirms their being. Many think of this responsiveness as it is the opposite of being academically rigorous. When I'm incorporating culture and being responsive, it's going to lack the academic rigor. This is something I've heard, numerous times in schools and doing trainings. How can we be responsive? Like, we're supposed to be a college prep school, or we're supposed to be whatever. How do we ensure that these things are gelled together and not repelling one another? What does it mean to be an academically rigorous school, but also embracing culture? I believe you can't have academic success or rigor without embracing culture. But would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think you said it. It's really simple in the sense that What is cultural responsiveness or its effectiveness as an approach to how we do our work, how we organize education spaces, if at the end of the day, young people are not being academically successful? I think people who make that claim are just sort of ignorant to what cultural responsiveness really is.
Yeah.
And this is just a perennial challenge of teacher preparation and principal preparation for the ways that we throw out particular terms, but don't have the tools to help folks connect theory to practice in really substantive ways. I think about, for myself, I think about empathy as this tool, because you can say, Miss Johnson, be culturally responsive, but Miss Johnson is going to imagine culturally responsive based on her own experience of culture and her own experience as being a woman, her own experience through her, whatever her religious, gender, racial lens is. And just saying be culturally responsive, i.e. build relationships, make sure kids care, make sure kids are academically successful, just telling someone that does not equip them to understand culture and to understand the lived realities of the young people sitting in front of them alone. They need tools to acquire new knowledge, new mechanisms of understanding. And I think for myself, empathy is one of those tools. And I could talk about that at another time. That's not the focus of this. But that's the piece. We really struggle with having, as a field, helping to prepare educators with the dispositions. Or let me talk about it like this. Educators are taking dispositions into their teaching. And I think of dispositions as trends in behavior, what I naturally do as a human being. And that's guided by my beliefs, my values, my morals, and so on. How do I help candidates think about all of who they are as people, as shaping the work that they do and the responsibility that they have for connecting with the communities and young people sitting in front of them to guide the work that they're doing, such that they are making better decisions that more often in interaction with young people produce evidence that we would then be able to name as cultural responsiveness. Cultural responsiveness is not an identity marker. It is not a thing to become. It is a framework for thinking about the efficacy of one's practices to achieve a particular goal. So that's the message that I try to get out to folks, is that this research should help you. It should be a bit of a temperature check, a metric to know what decisions am I making and how well are those decisions getting me to here. If you don't get these outcomes, then we got to check what you're doing, right? And then we can also then layer as part of that process, how prepared am I to understand issues of race and equity and justice and the ways that schools are structured to advantage particular ways of being and disadvantage other ways of being, right? It's a complicated conversation, and one that happens in one's preparation, but then follows them along the trajectory of their career.
Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. So outside of your amazing book, Urban Preparation, I know some folks have been asking where can they get it. We'll, share it as well throughout the night, but his website is ChezareWarren.com. Feel free to go to the website and check out the book. You can purchase it not only from his website, but you can also purchase it from Amazon. I saw someone put it in the comments, so thank you so much for that. So we're going to continue on. So I know that, outside of this book, you are thinking more about Black education spaces, which is the subject of a new paper that you have written. I've read it and liked the book. I ran out to my friend Tyler and was like, Tyler, you have to read this paper. So tell us a little bit more about it, and then we can kind of go a little bit in depth in some of the points that I highlighted from it.
Yeah, and I hope that we leave a substantive amount of time. I'm trying to make sure I'm not as long-winded.
We'll definitely have time for questions. I've seen questions come through, so we will definitely leave about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. Perfect.
So this paper is called Trading Spaces, Anti-Blackness and Reflections on the Future of Black Education. So when I got to the end of writing Urban Preparation, one of the things that occurred to me is that we can think of a school like Urban Prep, founded by a Black man in a Black community with Black boys in mind, as being the model of a sort of academic space that centers Blackness and Black folks in ways that traditional public schools won't, or haven't had the autonomy, agency, money to do, because that's what charter schools afford: autonomy, agency, money, in ways that traditional public schools don't. I talk about this in the book as decidedly Black spaces. And I talk about the tensions of what it might mean to be in a decidedly Black space, or to create, steward, nurture such spaces. But I knew I needed to write about and think about the concept of Black education space separately from the book. So this paper is a project of that thinking. I want to shout out my co-author, Dr. Justin Coles, who was my first doctoral student at Michigan State, who's an absolutely brilliant scholar. Scholar.google.com, look up his work, Justin Coles. He's a professor at Fordham University. It's been in partnership with him and more of my thinking and reading about the history of slavery and what it means to have spent over 250 years in bondage, and that we are free. We've only been free about 150 years. And really, if we think about the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act, then we're talking 50 years.
That's crazy.
What it means for us today. So the paper starts off with a reference to Dirrick Bell and his paper, The Space Traders. And I don't want to give the paper away, but I will say Dirrick Bell never talks about, and if you don't know about The Space Traders, I implore you to go and check it out. But it's basically the story of aliens from outer space who come to the United States and say, give us your Black people and we'll give you all of these natural resources. He never tells us who the aliens are, and he never tells us why the aliens came from outer space. So in the paper, we start to do some theorizing as inspired by this story to think about, well, what does Black education spaces, what might they look like? What might they look like? And even more importantly, when we think about the 400 years since African descended people were kidnapped and brought over to the Americas to begin chattel slavery, we're still here. We're still thriving. We're still finding ways to live and to dream, to plot and to heal. What about the creativity and ingenuity and what about the ways that our ancestors have persisted that we can learn from in thinking through the concept of Black education space? And so that's what the paper attempts to do. To think about, give a nod to the ways that Dirrick Bell is theorizing anti-Blackness in his work, the ways that African descended folks have for 400 years and continue to make room to both heal from anti-Blackness and resist anti-Blackness. And what that sort of, what a Black education space might mean as we learn to identify them, honor them, nurture, sustain, and steward them, what they might mean for helping us to reimagine Black education as a field, how we do our work when we think about doing Black education, right? And so that's what the paper is trying to do. And I think I see some people asking where you can get the paper. It's just been accepted. If you email me, I can maybe send you a copy, but it'll be available in the next several months more broadly. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No, this paper was really interesting to me. So as I shared earlier, I was a part of the Surge Fellowship, and Carmita, who is the founder of Surge, talked about Dirrick Bell and this notion of Black. What's the genre of this writing?
Critical race theory.
Critical race
would
theory
probably be.
Okay. Maybe it was something else that she said, but go ahead.
Oh, no. Maybe counter storytelling.
I don't know. Okay, I don't remember. But anyway, I think that she brought this story up. So when I read it in your paper, it was like, oh my God, like clearly this is something that I need to like read more about. But it was interesting to see that connection. But the three things that really stood out to me was around things that must be present or the three core tenets of this Black educational space. And I could be, yes, someone just said it, Afrofuturism. There we go. That's the genre I was talking about. But anyway, these three tenets: self-determination, self-actualization, and self-efficacy. In my line of work at the school that I work at, these three things are so like big for me. And I think in reading like what you wrote, I was like, we got to figure out how to like intertwine these things throughout every single aspect of how our school functions, how systems are created. I just want to like talk a little bit about those three. So self-determination, the quote that I love that stuck out to me, and I'm keeping the time up here. Black youth deserve to autonomously exercise their agency in ways they believe will best achieve their desired end with the support of Black educators whose primary goal is to enable Black students critical thinking about the world they want in contrast to the world for which they presently live. And I coupled that self-determination with this notion called adultism that we learned about, which is pretty much, as an adult, I know everything, I'm telling you everything, this is what you need to become, this is what you need to do because I said so and because I'm the adult. This self-determination piece is like totally counter of that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on the balance of guidance but not driving.
Yeah, so self-determination, as I've come to understand it, is one's capacity to make decisions autonomously without the overexertion or duress of a lot of external pressure, right?
Yeah.
So, and your question was how does self-determination...
What is that thin line? Like, what does that look like, right? Like, as an adult... Yeah.
So, as long as I've been in education, folks will say to teachers, we want your students to be critical thinkers. Part of what that means is that they get to ask questions that call us into questions, that challenge us.
Yeah.
Right? So, self-determination and this balance is really creating space and opportunity for young people, and this goes back again to Miseducation and Negro and Carter G. Woodson's admonition, that we help people to understand the world for what it is, and then we invite them to question that world and then decide how they want to engage that world.
Yes.
Our job is not to project onto them, and adults do this because we care and we want the best. Parents do this. This is what you need to do to get where you want to go. And we are scared to let people go and make their mistakes and to fall apart and to get it wrong, right? The failure and getting it wrong is such a necessary, important part of the learning process.
It is.
So if I'm always telling you what you have to do and I'm never giving you space to push back, to question, to ponder, to contemplate, to resist, then I'm actually doing you a disservice.
Yep.
Right? And in the context of the book, I talk about self-determination in chapter 5 because the young men in the book were in their 4th year of college, and part of what they realized is that they got to college and there was the first time where they got to determine their futures. As a young person, they navigated their neighborhoods really based on their personal well-being, right? Their overexposure to gangs and violence really placed a lot of restrictions on where they could go and what they could do and who they could talk to. Once they got to high school, it was the same issue. They navigated the urban prep environment, but the messages were really strong about go to college, climb the mountain. I'm exceptional not because I say it, but because I work hard at it. For 4 years, they getting very clear messages about who and what they can become. And they didn't very often get asked, well, what's really important to you, right? What's really valuable to you? And the young men talk about it in the book as becoming a sort of commodity, where if you didn't fit or if you resisted the direction that the school was pushing you in, that's another layer of marginalization that you endure as part of this sort of education process that is supposed to be liberating, because I'm putting you on the track to college so you can be successful in a society.
Yeah.
So I think that the balance is negotiated person by person. Not every young person needs the same amount of support, but I think there has to be lots of space, and this is a tension for these types of what we talk about as Black education spaces. There's a tension that these spaces need to give room for young people to just not to have an opinion and have a voice, and for those voices to be in dissent, and for that space to still love and nurture those voices at the same time.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think back to, and I often like through therapy and like life, I think back to my childhood, and I'm like, my mom actually did give me a lot of room to like make mistakes. There was a time I did not want to go to college, and my mom like said, put together a plan, and when you put together the plan, I'll listen to the presentations were big in my house. I'll listen to the presentation and we'll figure it out, right? I was running away. I was going to California. I was going to be a documentary filmmaker. I was going to intern with somebody and make it big. Realized that, okay, this may not necessarily work. And then realize, okay, maybe I should go to college and maybe I should just major in film. So creating that space allowed for me to make those decisions based on my own logic, not her saying, you going to college, like, what you talking about? Like, you are going to college, right? And that's how I, when I think about being a parent or even being a teacher, I want to create that same opportunity. Like, this is what you want to do? All right. Let's do some research. Let's pull together all the things. And at the end, we'll make that decision based on what you presented. So, yeah, I think that's an amazing example. The second piece is self-actualization. Spaces should inspire individuality and bold, unique personal expression. And that's how I yeah. Sorry, no, you're good. Allowing space for students to be themselves. Every student shouldn't be pushed in this box of what success looks like, how they should be. I mean, that goes back to our, respectability situation. But very quickly, in interest of time, give us like a quick thing about self-actualization.
It's really, I think it closely resembles self-determination, but I think it's connecting yourself to how it is that we invite young people to discover their passions and then to live out or act out those passions in real time, right? To actualize what they're feeling. I think about in one's journey, how if you don't have space, again, to try things out and make mistakes, how you always have a question mark in the back of your head, and you have the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And I just wonder, in what space do young people have to do that? And again, because we want to help Black kids, we think college is the only way to go, so we don't have time to have you talk about your dreams. But why does that have to be adversarial to going to college? One example that your example reminded me of is that there's a school that I work with that shall remain nameless. But I thought that it was a brilliant practice. In the junior year, they invite these young people into a class to explore problems that they're really interested in. Based on the problems that they explore, the next class, they have to think about what they would create to respond to that problem. They have to dream up a solution to a problem that they're invested in. And then in the third semester, they have to actually build it and do it and then come back and report about it. I think that's brilliant.
That is.
Over a year and a half, these young people get to problem solve, create something original with the support and guidance of adults, and then they have to go and actually do it, test it out, build a nonprofit, build a website, build a mentoring program. And then come back and say what they learned. I think that that's a brilliant sort of example of the ways that self-actualization can actually show up and work.
I agree. Last point, and then we're going to questions. So let's do this in like 3 minutes. All right. So the last one is self-efficacy. This was, I think, one of my favorites. a necessary component of Black freedom, and young people do not achieve self-efficacy without having a very positive self-concept, which centers on one's deep conviction that they are, for example, beautiful, smart, and capable. Right. So talk to us a little bit about that third piece. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you want to bring in this Venn diagram at some point to talk about, or if we have time for that. But go ahead.
Why don't you throw it up there real quick? I'm gonna give myself less than 60 seconds to sort of just talk about it.
Okay, cool.
And it'll sort of tie these things together. So, but I can't see it. Okay. I think I remember. So efficacy is basically, am I fulfilled? Am I confident that whatever difficulty that I face, that I can overcome it? Or whatever task that I come up against, that I will achieve the desired results. I think that hints on when we think about getting Black youth into a space to really value who they are. My Black is beautiful, Black girl magic, Black boy joy. It's about being able to understand their reflection and be proud of who they are, and not to apologize for the aspects of their personhood that show up or help to make them sort of peculiar or particular or unique in the world. So what I tried to do in the paper, or what Justin and I tried to do in the paper, and I want to shout out just some colleagues who are thinking about these issues of fugitivity, in particular, Kiana Ross at Northwestern University. Think about my colleague Terry Flanall at Michigan State, and Dorinda Carter-Andrews, and a series of folks who are thinking about racial counter spaces and fugitivity. And we think about Black educational spaces as physical, geographical locations, but also cultural practices, traditions. I went to the University of Illinois. The Black students always stood on one side of the union, and we congregated together. And there was a space that we used to both heal, but also learn to resist what was happening around us. And in those spaces, we got to self-determine, we got to dream, we got to talk out loud about what was challenging us, we got to show up as our unique selves. So the paper and the concept of Black education spaces is meant to give us a frame for thinking about and noticing where and how these spaces already exist, and then to give support and to nurture those spaces, right? And if that means helping to build those spaces when they don't already exist, then we can do that too. But yeah, so that's what this is, and hopefully it pushes our thinking as a field, as a way. We're talking a lot about anti-Blackness in this moment, and the ways that schools are sites of pain and suffering, which is an important, necessary acknowledgement. Well, we also have to acknowledge that Black folks have always resisted our oppression. How do we do that? Can we start to name that?
Love it, love it, love it. This was amazing. We have some questions that are coming in. Definitely feel free to continue to type in your questions. Thank you, Andrew, for typing these up for us. Our first question is from Christopher Mathis. And his question is, are there comments on how respectability politics play into the preservation of Black boys' lives, especially in a society where it shoot first and subsequently ask questions later?
Well, the thing about respectability is that it don't keep us from getting shot. We still got Black skin, no matter, what we have on our body. The issue is not what we do. The issue is who we are. That is the thing that is scary to people. And I want to say that anti-Blackness and the logics of viewing, when we immediately see Blackness and Black bodies as a thing to be scared of and afraid of, that don't have nothing to do with how we talk, how we dress, any of it. So when I think about respectability and its merits, I don't know that it has so many merits. I think that we can honor Black men who like to wear shirts and ties and who are dapper and who have short haircuts and whatever, and who speaks the King English or whatever it is, but we need to also honor Black folks who identify as Black men who like to wear women's clothes, who have tapped into and are connected to their femininity. We need to honor Black men who like to wear saggy jeans and who don't have a college education. All of us deserve to live our lives, right? And respectability is not a remedy, especially in the 2020 context. I understand to a degree its origin and the feelings about its necessity, but I will push us to just continue to think broadly about the ways that we're contributing to our own dehumanization with a politic like respectability.
Love it. Thank you so much. The next question is from Jillian. She says, in reference to conversations around the intersection of race, gender, and sexuality, how do we ensure that educators are doing that work, creating open, welcoming spaces, when we don't know kind of like where to begin? How do we create those spaces, or where do we begin to look? Because essentially, one doesn't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to young people much more often. And we need to be in conversation with people who are experiencing those spaces. We often leave out of the conversation like lunchroom workers, custodial staff, ancillary staff, supplemental staff. When we think about building environments that are safe for all kids, we need to think about who are the voices and perspectives and eyes in our building that will help us to notice the spaces that the teacher or the school leader won't notice. And there are lots of folks who talked about the importance of listening to young people and listening to families as they are engaged in the school improvement process. And I always question and wonder how well we are censoring students' perspectives and voices and doing it in a way that is systematic, not just collecting survey data, but over the course of time, continuing to build our policies and practices in relationship to what we know, the intel that we have about the young people who are sitting in front of us. And part of that also means a professional learning community. Read urban preparation.
Yes.
Get senses and perspectives that help you to notice what you don't already know, and be engaged with people who have a different point of view. Because I think that's part of how we learn what we don't know. Right.
Cool. This is a big one. A long question. Well, not really a long question, but a great segue too. So for my friend Tyler that I was talking about earlier, thank you so much for engaging us in this virtual conversation. I think this is a super important conversation, and one that we must keep top of mind in educational/youth serving spaces. I sometimes find myself overwhelmed when thinking about or working towards trying to center, empower, and uplift students despite the systems that work against them and us. All of the isms, right? Interested to hear from both of you. How do you remain hopeful in the midst of all of this?
I continue. Our emotions and our hearts are just deceitful. Our emotions will betray us. And I think it's really important that we set an intention towards finding examples and lifting up and foregrounding possibility. This is a sort of preview, but I'm doing a lot of thinking in this present moment, Tyler. This is a great question. Around the concept of possibility. If you think someone is broken and you imagine them as a broken thing, anything that you do to engage with them is going to start with and be informed by your ideology or belief about their brokenness. If I believe that you are a whole person, that you are smart, that you are capable, that you have in you everything you need to be absolutely successful, I'm going to approach you very differently. And how the orientation from which I make decisions about how I care for you and engage with you matters for how you see yourself, how the environment is organized to respond to you and nurture your well-being, and ultimately whether or not I achieve my intended outcome when I set out to work with you. So I think part of how I remain hopeful and why I'm writing what I'm writing and why I'm thinking what I'm thinking right now is because I am hopeful, and because I have examples. We have examples of people who have continued. Black folks are still here. We're still here, and we still pushing. I think that's full of inspiration. So I just do a lot to try to have joy, to find our joy, to look at all the ways that we're beautiful. And I'll sort of just say this in closing. When that man got elected in November, I mourned for a good 3-4 days straight. Like I felt like someone close to me had died. Knowing what I know about white supremacy, one should not have been surprised, right? But we kind of got spoiled with Barack Obama. But I made the decision there that I'm not sharing videos of black people being slaughtered. I'm not sharing articles that continue to talk about all the ways that we're broken. It's important that that stuff gets documented. But for me, because of what I think my contribution is supposed to be in the world, it was important to me that I found ways to surround myself with all of the things that made us brilliant and tenacious and beautiful. And I think that that's important for sustaining hope.
Love it. Last question from all the way from Philly, from my friend Isaiah, my brother. Do black people have the luxury and privilege to fail when oftentimes those failures can come with death, jail, and other traumatic outcomes? I think this was in response to our conversation about self-determination, right? Being able to determine where I want to go, failing, learning some lessons, and jumping back up and doing it again. Do we have the luxury to do that? Is a question from Isaiah.
I think the question we also have to ask ourselves, do we have the luxury not to do it? I mean, anything that's worth having is worth the risk taking. And if all of our heroes thought, if Nat Turner, if Harriet Tubman, all of the great black abolitionists of our time thought, I could fail at this, and this is that for me, where would we be, right? And the thing is, if many more of us take risks, if many more of us are willing to push back, to resist, nothing changes without some form of resistance. And I always say, folks got to find their revolutionary act. Whatever your sphere of influence, whatever spaces you occupy, you have an opportunity to say, hey, you should stop misgendering black trans people. If this person who was born male wants to be identified as female, out of love and respect for this person's humanity, don't misgender them, right? Or if they don't want to subscribe to a gender binary, let's do the work of unlearning all that we've learned to categorize, label, classify people who look like us. Yeah. We just have to be willing, I think in some ways, we have to all, I think, figure out what are we willing to die for? What are the problems we are willing to stick our necks out for? It's not comfortable. Justice work is not comfortable work. And we're all negotiating the tension. So I don't get to judge you for the ways that you participate or don't, and you don't get to judge me for the ways that I participate or don't, right? But hopefully there's enough of us who are engaged in participating and resisting.
I don't know about you, but when you were mentioning those names, like just talking about like Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, all these folks who've come before, I just got like this chill like over my body, thinking about the risks and the amount of work and the level of just confidence in what I see the future being, that I can't sit down and do nothing. Right. That is powerful just to think about. It takes me back to this quote by Maya Angelou that I love, that I come as one, but like I stand as 10,000, right? Like, it's literally, when I just think about our ancestors and the levels of uncomfortableness, the things that they risked for us to just be able to be in 2020, it just brings a tear to my eye. I say it all the time, but I'm just so thankful to be black. I'm just so thankful to come from the people that I came from, and because of that, like, you can't tell, there's nothing that I cannot do.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need their stories, and we need all of our stories. The church will say we overcome by the word of our testimony.
Hey.
We have to tell our stories, and in telling our stories, we garner the strength to move forward. So, in my work moving forward, that's what's important to me. Urban preparation is about telling our stories.
Yeah.
The next book is about telling our stories. This paper on Black education spaces is about telling our stories. And as Cynthia Dillard, a sage, beautiful Black woman scholar, the importance of remembering, piecing back together the aspects of our personhood that have been stripped away is such an important and valuable part of our journey. So.
Yes. Like, thank you so much, Chezare. I'm just so thankful that we were able to have this online conversation. I know we both were like, yes, part 2 in the fall. Like, we got to do it in person. Hopefully this corona goes away and we can convene together and have an in-person experience. But no, for real, man, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for putting this thought and this work into the atmosphere, into the universe, for us to be able to read and to gain hope and inspiration. As you said, like, it may not necessarily give all the answers, but it definitely brings awareness of the work that we need to do and taking it into the spaces that we occupy. And how much we do that or how little we do that is on the level of comfortability that we have in taking that risk, not for us, but for the future of us, right? So thank you. I appreciate it. For y'all that are out there, stay safe, stay inside. I love you all. Thank you for your support. Keep your head up and remain hopeful, because hope ain't canceled, y'all. It's still here. It's still here. Here is Chezare's book information. Check out the book. You can get it online, www.chezarewarren.com. You can order it today. Amazon, I think some other folks has been able to order it from Amazon. And without further ado, we are done. Y'all have a great rest of the day. Love you. Be safe.